Welcome to Dad Gives Advice. In this video, I'm going to be covering education savings accounts that are sponsored by either the federal government or the individual states. Before I get started, I want to remind everyone that the information that I provide here is for educational purposes only and geared towards a generic audience. You should consult a financial advisor that can tailor an individual investment plan for you before taking any action. Generally speaking, there are two types of government-sponsored education savings plans. These are Coverdell accounts and 529 plans. The purpose of these is to incentivize parents and other relatives to save for their children's future education. Coverdell accounts were created by the federal government and are sometimes called education IRAs. Unlike traditional IRAs, the money that goes into Coverdells is after-tax dollars, and these dollars cannot be deducted from your federal income tax. Each child in the family can have a total of up to $2,000 per year deposited into their Coverdell account. And that money can come from any relative, but the total cannot exceed that $2,000 per year. The benefits of these accounts is that, like a traditional IRA, the money grows tax-free. And like a Roth IRA, the money can be withdrawn without having to pay taxes. As long as those withdrawals are used to pay for qualified education expenses and that the child's education expenses are at least equal to or exceed the withdrawals from the Coverdell account. So for example, if your child in a given year has $5,000 in total educational expenses and you withdraw $4,500 from the Coverdell account to cover some of those expenses, then that money will not be taxed. If you withdraw more than that, let's say $6,000, then you'll have to pay taxes on that $1,000 that was over and above the $5,000 cost of educational expenses for that year. For extremely high earners, you may not qualify to be able to donate to Coverdell accounts. The child must use all the money in the account by age 30. But if that is not possible, that account can be transferred to another qualified child who is below the age of 18. If there is no other qualifying child to roll over to, the money must be withdrawn within 30 days of the person's 30-year birthday, and whatever is left over will be taxed and subject to a 10% penalty. Qualified education expenses include K through 12 education and college and universities. Any withdrawals that are greater than the child's educational expenses for any given year will result in a 10% penalty as well as taxes. So care should be taken to only withdraw the amount that is required to cover educational expenses. The other plan type is the 529s, and these are state-sponsored plans as opposed to federal plans like Coverdells. Some states require that you be a resident of the state before you can participate in a plan, and some allow outside participants. You'll have to check with each state to determine how the plan works in your state. There are special 529 plans called prepaid tuition plans that have more restrictions, and those may require you to be a resident of the state and may require the child to attend an in-state university. Each state has slightly different rules, so check with your individual state's website and your advisor. 529s work very similar to the way that Coverdells work. Money goes in after taxes, it grows tax-free, and can be withdrawn without having to pay taxes as long as it is used for qualified education expenses. Non-qualified withdrawals are subject to 10% penalty and taxes. There are fewer restrictions with 529 plans. For example, the donation amount is unlimited. There is no $2,000 per year limit. But there can be consequences for giving too much and for growing this account to too big a size. More on this in a minute. One difference is that the donor controls the account and can move the account across different family members if he or she so chooses. If one child doesn't use up all of the funds, they can move the account to another child. Or if one child ends up not going to college, they can move that account to another child in the family. There is no 30-year age limit, and the donor can be the beneficiary. So you as an adult of any age can set up your own 529 plan for your own education expenses. And the donor and beneficiary do not have to be related. Now, like I said, it's an unlimited donation that can be made, but there are consequences if you donate too much. Technically, these donations are considered gifts, and if you contribute above the gift tax limit, you will have to pay taxes on those gifts. For 2022, the gift tax limit is $15,000 per person. So a couple of parents can donate up to $30,000 per year into a 529 plan without it involving gift taxes. And the same is true for grandparents, uncles, aunts, what have you. And most of these plans allow for an accelerated gifting schedule that can happen without paying taxes as well. So you can pay upfront 5 years worth of gifts and avoid gift tax as well. So for a couple, that would amount to $150,000 one time. And for an individual, that's $75,000 one time. Again, that's for those plans that allow for accelerated gifting. And if they do allow for that, then those won't require a gift tax either. But even if you're a very rich family, you don't want to go crazy and put too much money into these accounts because the money does have to be used for education. If you put way too much money in this account and it grows to a huge amount, you may end up having way too much money in there and not be able to spend it all on education for all the family relatives or yourself or other adults that are in the family or somebody else that you want to declare as a beneficiary. So be careful how much you put in. You don't want this account to get too big and then have to pay those 10% penalties and taxes once you have to take out the excess amount later on. If your state has an income tax, then your 529 contribution may be deductible at the state income level. You should review your plan with your tax professional before taking any action, however, especially if you're thinking about investing in an out-of-state plan. If I were to use one or both of these types of accounts, I would definitely use the index fund investing strategy that I described in my video on that subject. And remember that video is very generic in nature, so you should work with a financial advisor to determine how best to use index funds in these accounts to grow the money to the point where you can then leverage it for your child's college education, and also work with that person to determine when it's time to start moving the money out of equity funds into safer bond or money market funds as you get closer and closer to the date where the child is going to need the money for their college education. The benefits of these plans are pretty clear. Tax-free growth and tax-free use of money that is earmarked for educational purposes. So that's the upside. The downsides are that the money must be used for education. So if there's money left over and you can't pass it on to another child or another person that can use the money for education, it's going to have to be taken out and it's going to have to be taxed, and there'll probably be a 10% penalty to boot. I should also mention that some states have prepaid college programs that don't work like accounts that you manage or your advisor manages as an investment fund. They work with a lump sum of money that you pay to the state that the state then invests and grows to the point where they then provide your child with enough money to cover 4 years of college when they turn 18. So the way that works is you give them X number of dollars per month or per year starting from the year that they're born, and then by the time that they're 18 years old, the state has invested that money and then will provide the child with 4 years of college education. Now, states sometimes will only cover certain fees and the tuition related to class time with that money, and they won't cover things like other fees and lab fees and books and room and board. So you may need extra money outside of this kind of prepaid program in order to fund your child's college education. An example in Florida, if your child was born in 2022 and you started making contributions in the year that your child is born, they will charge you about $186 per month. And by the time that that child is 18, they will guarantee that they'll cover at least 4 years at an in-state school. At this rate, they estimate that the planned payout will be $63,500. And that's how they estimate that that will cover the 4 years worth of college. And as you can see, that money is not going to cover everything. It's not going to cover room and board and several other fees and books that they're going to need to pay for by the time they're in college 18 years from now. For comparison, if you were to take that $186 per month and invested over the course of 18 years at that 10% rate that I always use, you would end up with $102,000 when it's all said and done. So you can see there that if you invest the money yourself in an index fund that's going to return about 10% per year on average, you're going to get a lot more than the state thinks that they're going to get with the money that they're investing. The $102,000 is more likely to cover more things like room and board and books and other fees than this money that you're going to get from the prepaid program. On top of that, if you did this yourself, for example, if the state only provides this type of program, you might want to opt to do it yourself, because in the end, this money will be very flexible. You'll be able to use this for anything and not necessarily be forced to use it for educational expenses, because you did this in your own separate brokerage account that is a taxable account. You will be paying taxes on gains, but you'll have the flexibility of being able to use that money for anything. And if your child decides not to go to college, they decide they're not the college type, you now have a nice amount of money that you've built up, maybe to help the child buy their first home or to buy a boat or whatever it is that you want to do with the money at that time. And this is true when comparing growth of an account to a Coverdell or a 529 plan as well. You might want to check with your advisor to have them run some simulations to determine whether it makes sense for you to do your own separate brokerage account instead of a Coverdell or a traditional 529, and see how that grows in your own taxable account, and determine whether it makes sense for you to have that flexibility so you're not forced to use that money for education in 18 years' time, but you have the flexibility to use it for anything else. Again, if the child decides not to go to college. So the bottom line is these plans are available, they can work for you, and they can be good if you are interested in that ability to grow the money without paying taxes and being able to use the money without paying taxes. But there is the limitation of having to use it for educational expenses. So don't put too much money into these accounts, because you don't want to have that 10% penalty hit you at the end if they've grown to the point where they're too high. If your state only has a prepaid program like the one I described here for Florida, you may decide to opt for your own account outside of that in a taxable brokerage account and grow the money yourself in an account where you're going to be able to probably grow it to a higher number, and you're going to have the flexibility of being able to use it for anything rather than being forced to use it for only educational expenses. That's my summary on education savings plans. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or any other topic suggestions you'd like me to cover. Other than that, thanks for watching and have a great day.